Hello, old friends. This is Mike Dawson, and I welcome all of you to the Silent Pianist Podcast, where I interview curious people that do extraordinary things. Today's guest is singer, songwriter, instrumentalist, and recording artist Paul D'Adamo. He's best known as the creative force behind the album Tell Me Something, which features members of Genesis and the Phil Collins Band. He also released the album Alone in the Crowd, Songs for Social Awareness, that features the music of Lee Carreri. And Paul's upcoming third album, Rawfully Organic, features members of Peter Gabriel's band, King Crimson, and, unbelievably, the band Yes. It'll be released sometime in the next few months. And if he's not busy enough, Paul is the owner-operator of the Cozy Ark Recording Studio here in North Texas. And in fact, our conversation today took place at Paul's Cozy Ark Studios. Enjoy my interview with Paul D'Adamo. These days, in addition to their ability to create these very complicated space missions and send them like to Pluto, or they send them to Saturn, like they're getting ready to crash the Cassini into Saturn because they don't want to infect the moon that they think is going to be where there's the ocean, Ecladius.
Right.
And they think, like I was telling you about Neil deGrasse Tyson, he hopes that they're going to be able to, send a satellite there, and they're going to drill through the ice, and then they're going to find Dora, and it's going to be looking at them, it's going to be like a Wall-E kind of moment. Exactly. And I think that's going to be so interesting to watch. And I don't know if NASA is going to be the guys that are going to get to Mars. It's probably going to be Elon Musk, because that's what he wants to do. I think he wants to be, like a benevolent, the guy from Austin Powers,
right.
Petting the cat and, I'll get $1 million. And I think he's going to be the guy to do it, because he's ballsy enough to do it. Whether he's going to be able to get the money to do it, I think is completely debatable, because, nation states can't afford it on their own to do it. How's he going to be able to do
right.
it? And I think that's why he's able to do the things that he does now, is that he's able to manipulate the system quite well. And Robert Heinlein, did a book many, many years ago, back in the 40s or whatever it is, and the premise of the book was basically there was a guy that was the richest man in the world, but what he really wanted to do was to, fly in space. And the laws at the time were, well, we can't allow you to be on the rocket because you're not healthy enough. And so he worked really hard to get the other guys there, and then his swan song, so to speak, was that he flew and died, because Heinlein knows how to, kind of
right.
He preaches a message, but he also gets dark, very dark in his thing. So everything is working. I think we're good. What I basically do is I just create a track.
Okay.
And then we're just hanging, man.
Okay, cool.
So
is that fan too much of an interference?
No, I don't hear it at all through the cans.
Okay.
So I think we're all good here. So Paul, welcome to the Silent Pianist.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for helping us set up in your Busey Cozy Ark studio, which is very cozy, by the way. I'm looking around here, and everybody that can't see what I'm looking at, I'm seeing a picture of Jim Morrison, and then I look to my left and I see nothing but racks of gear And of course, there's a great Gretsch guitar that is going to sound great. I know I'll play it someday. And we got keyboards, and we got a little bear. We got it's a lion. It's a lion.
It's a lion.
So is there a significance on the lion with the heart?
No, there's no significance with the lion with the heart.
It's your friend.
It's my friend.
It's your friend.
One of my students had given that to me, for I think it was Christmas or something, and had given me the lion. So it just sits there on the keyboard, having the Cozy Ark. I'm a big animal activist, and for people that know me know that I have ducks and sheep and German shepherds and horses as pets. And
right, is that something you've always had a love for? Is just the love of nature and the love of creatures in your life?
Yes and no. I mean, growing up in New York and right outside of New York City, you're limited because you're in a concrete jungle, so to speak. So I had a dog growing up and a couple of cats, but and as I got older into my college days, you start to explore with different types of animals like ferrets, and I've had those. And
were they like a friend of mine had ferrets? He was a roommate, and they would always destroy my chess set.
Well, it was tough because I didn't necessarily always keep my ferret, who affectionately was named Kiri after, at the time, my favorite soprano with the Met was Kiri Takanawa. So
who wouldn't have that as a favorite?
Exactly.
Did you get to see her perform?
I got to work with her.
Oh, well,
in a master class.
Wait a minute. So tell me about that.
So I was able to, when I was studying privately. I was studying privately. My first vocal teacher was a cantor by the name of Raymond Smolover. And he was working with a lot of great artists. He had a studio in Scarsdale, New York, which is where I grew up in Westchester County. So I would go to his home studio for my vocal lessons from the time I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And he actually got me through the voice change and introduced me to so many people who, like Edmund Karlsrud, who was a baritone and a basso with the Metropolitan Opera, and I met Tony Randall and Donna Pescow. But one of the people that really influenced me at a very young age was that he introduced me to Richard Kiley, who was known for playing Don Quixote in Man of La Mancha.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On Broadway. So
very familiar with that.
So I was able to spend time with Richard Kiley and when he was performing, go backstage and watch him and it was a great thing. So I guess from the time I was 6, I wanted to be a singer, and I know I'm kind of going off on a diatribe because I think we were talking about animals, but
there's not much difference between singers and animals.
That's true. But I started, and how I got to work classically was 13. When you're a boy, you're either an alto or you become a tenor, and genetically it just was, I guess, going to be predisposed that I became a tenor. And growing up in an Italian household and listening to big bands and Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and everything, as I started getting older and my voice and my range had expanded into the tenor realm, I started getting influenced by, Mario Lanza, Luciano Pavarotti, Franco Corelli. So I started having a great affinity for opera at a very, very young age. So I was able to, in my later teens, early, before I hit 2021, I was able to do some work at the Juilliard School as a non-matriculated student and be able to do some master classes. And, I guess from the time I was 15, 16, I started studying with a great operatic vocal coach at Del Terzo Music Studios in Carnegie Hall. So every Saturday I had a lesson in Carnegie Hall, which was great,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I studied with a gentleman for about 5 or 6 years by the name of Martin Leese after I left Ray Smolover. And they were both, you're going from a Jewish cantor who was an amazing tenor to, somebody who had done work with so many opera companies and worked,
So his start, if you call it that, was being as a cantor.
For Ray Smolover, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Really. Absolutely.
That's intense, man.
Extremely. And he was just an amazing human being, just a great influence on me, just a warm, very personable, very loving individual. I mean,
so what was the lessons like for you at that time when you're kind of figuring out your mature voice? At that age, because you've gone through the transformation of your voice from a young boy into a young man. What was key in his coaching or training that you still remember now?
Well, by the time I was obviously, Ray had kind of taken me as far as I think at that point that he could. And because I was bitten by the opera bug, I felt that that's exactly what I wanted to do.
Right.
Was be an opera singer. So I wanted to obviously evolve myself into a teacher that did nothing but that. With Ray, there were the Porgy and Bess standards. There were the Sinatra standards. There were, the Vic Damone, all of those influences. And there was some light classical when my voice started changing. He was actually the first teacher that brought me into the realm of opera arias for tenors. So what I was feeling or what I was going through was just a really strict regimen of vocal exercises that I kept to this day. I still vocalize and still remember what I learned as a child, and because I've only had 2 vocal teachers in my life.
Sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, I mean, and there's times where where I'm doing modern music now, it's kind of it's hard to decipher. Okay, when you're using your soft palate, or when you're breathing, how do you want to approach a note? Especially when you're doing pop music or rock music, it tends to be a little bit more. You've got to keep the classical training in the back of your head and use it as a resource, but you don't necessarily want it to be in the forefront of the recording or the performance aspect.
Right, because you're all of a sudden you're bel canto.
Correct. And it's kind of hard to do if you're doing an R&B tune sometimes.
No, I know that my own experience, mine was completely reversed, where my vocal training was very intuitive with just a little bit of choir training. But I was able to observe as a piano player, as I accompanied a lot of singers, how not to be trained as a vocalist. Because I saw something that I learned later, that I saw a lot of what I realized was wrong education.
And that's something, actually, I envy you because of the fact that because I was trained, because I studied, you get that mindset that it's supposed to be this way. And when you're working with somebody who doesn't do it this way, I wish I could use more of my intuition rather than my skill set. And I've started to, as a teacher over the last 15, 20 years, I've done a lot more of being intuitive, because every student that I work with is not the way that Domino's makes pizza. It's not assembly line. I mean, you're dealing with an individual, you're dealing with emotion, you're dealing with, I think sometimes as teachers, and I'm dealing with adult students as well as I'm dealing with younger students, the adult students tend to hire me not just to teach them, but I become sort of their quote-unquote therapist, because if they've had a bad day at work or they're having problems at home or whatever the case may be, I wind up spending an hour and a half with them, being more of getting them to calm down and try to focus on what it is that we're doing on the lesson. But, it's we talked about this earlier about artistry in teaching. So as my voice developed, I just wanted to be an opera singer. And I did that for a while, for about 4 years on and off as a tenor, doing some minor roles with members of New York City Opera and doing performances. And I enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. But then, I was always a big fan from the time I was a kid, not just of Sinatra, but when I was about 12 years old, my brother came home from college and brought home an album by Genesis called Abacab. And
that's one of the later records.
Yeah, I mean, that was before I even developed into, even though I was also a piano student, I had no idea the whole realm of progressive rock and keyboard solos and, several different time signatures in a song and, listening to Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But he was into that. And, he would come home from college and I would just raid his record collection and just start listening to everything.
Right. What's your brother's name, by the way?
My brother's name is John.
And was he a musician? Or is a musician, I should say?
He's not a musician. He took piano lessons and for years, I mean...
So he's a lover of music.
Yeah, I mean, he, for a long time I heard him play the piano intro to Come Sail Away. And that was,
right.
I think that was his high point as a musician. I mean, I would come home from school and he would be sitting at the piano and I would hear, the piano intro to Styx's Come Sail Away. So, but, he was always a big supporter of what I wanted to do as a musician.
But he turned you on to that music.
He did. He was very much responsible for getting me into the realm of things outside of big bands, outside of, the saloon singer and outside of classical music. And, I mean, to this day, I'm sure my parents would have felt that he had corrupted me, but I actually think the opposite because I still have a great love for classical music. I love singing classical music. I love singing Sinatra standards and saloon songs, but I also love doing the Peter Gabriel, doing the Yes, doing the Genesis, and, and even the adult contemporary. I mean, my style of playing and singing now is probably along the lines of like a Michael McDonald,
Right.
So, I mean, he's really, my brother helped me to evolve, really.
Where do you turn when you see your master plan go up in smoke? You do a real slow burn as you grind your teeth and laugh until you choke. If you wonder why, then Murphy's Law explains the awful news. If something can go wrong, it will. That's how you get the Murphy Blues. The Murphy Blues, yeah. You had it all worked out. Your clockwork plan put mother time to shame. If a fire broke out in the local restaurant, you'd eat the flame. You would. You felt so strong. Success was in the air. How could you lose? But something could go wrong, and it did. That's how you got the Murphy Blues. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The Murphy Blues, yes. Silver lining all around you. You cloud the why, the where, the how, yeah. Now you're crying over spilled milk, and you're running out to find a different cow. If you think you're cool and Murphy's Law don't apply to you, if nothing can go wrong, you fool, Murphy thinks of something new. Whoa, whoa. That's how you get the Murphy Blues. Yes. Let's have a hand for the knowledge, the persistence, the insight, and the omnipresence of Murphy Blues. Oh no.
So I wanted to kind of even roll back the clock a little bit more, because one of the ideas that I had when I first thought I was going to do The Silent Pianist as an interview show in long form was to find out people's origins. And you're giving me a little bit of a glimpse of this by talking about growing up on the island, going into Manhattan, hanging at the Juilliard
Not the
School.
island. I lived in a suburb of New York, 20 minutes out by train, 30 minutes out by car. Not on Long Island. I actually lived in a county called Westchester County.
Oh, you're in Westchester. I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
I grew up in a town that I spent a lot of my time in Harrison and Mamaroneck, New York.
Okay.
So
Okay, gotcha. So, so tell me a little bit about your mom and dad. Were they musicians? And what's your dad's name?
my father's name was James. He's no longer with us. Unfortunately, he passed away 15 years ago. My mom is Patricia. And my father was we had an organ. We had a Wurlitzer 2-manual organ in the house, and with the pedals and the whole 9 yards. And my father loved playing and never took a music lesson in his life. But, from the time I was a kid, I remember some of the first songs that I've ever learned that were around the organ were Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree.
Yeah, absolutely.
By Tony Orlando and Dawn.
Big
and I
hit,
think
man.
even around that time, my brother had this little device, this little red device, battery operated, where you can stick 45s in. It had a handle, and it was like a portable, turntable record player that would play 45s. And he had a 45 of one side, Elton John's Benny and the Jets, which I always thought was kind of cool. It was the live version because that's how Elton John released the single.
Right.
But on the flip side was a song that was featured on the album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road called Harmony.
Okay, I remember that too.
And it was just one of those ballads. And that was kind of like I would be in the basement, because in New York you have basements as opposed to
where we are
Texas,
in Texas.
Right. And he would have that, and he would play it, and he taught it to me. So he would bring the record player up, and my brother's 8 years older than I am. So, I'm 48 and he's 56. So he would bring it upstairs, and, he would play it for my father, and I would sing along. And I think at that point, when I was 5, 6 years old, they kind of realized that there could be some sort of...
Something's going on.
Something's going on.
Because you got ears even at 5.
Right, exactly. So
Right,
I'm hearing melody, and I'm sure there's always some sort of pitch issues, but it got to the point where I expressed an interest, and we didn't have a piano at the time, so the first formal lessons that I had
was on the organ.
And I had one of those teachers that was so soft, and it's okay, and my father, being Italian and being the youngest of 6
not
kids,
soft and not
yeah,
okay.
it was not like, if we're paying for lessons, we want a teacher that's going to be, really energized for lack. That's a good word, really, because I don't think that's the word that my father would have used.
It was fucking energized.
Yeah. So there you go. So I don't know exactly if I have free reign of speech here, but yeah,
you have all the range you want.
Okay, beautiful. So yeah, I think he wanted more of a hard ass of a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I eventually got that. I started studying at a conservatory at a young age called the Fabrio School of Music in Mount Vernon, New York. And it was owned and run by a guy by the name of Sal Fabrio. And I think it's still there. And my first piano teacher was a guy by the name of Sidney Lewis. My first vocal teacher was a Jewish cantor. My first serious piano teacher was a Jewish guy that used to play with Sammy Kahn and work with Sammy Kahn. So my parents were thrilled because it was like, I'm learning all of this stuff, and I took to piano like any other 6-year-old kid would do. But I hated practicing. I detested it. I wanted to take lessons.
Yeah.
But I just, I didn't want to practice. I was 6 years old. I wasn't, God rest his soul, I wasn't Keith Emerson, who was playing Liszt at the age of 3,
Right.
So that's kind of how it all inspired. Then, my father would buy, a drum kit, and it was kept down in the basement. And I think it was more along the lines of how just to fiddle around with. I took violin lessons, and I remember for about 6 months to 9 months when I was like 7 or 8, I took guitar lessons, and thank God it was on a nylon string guitar, because I don't think I would have lasted 6 weeks on a steel string acoustic guitar. He picked up these instruments that garage sales in the neighborhood. And so he had, as I started evolving and I told them I wanted to be a singer, I'd seen Frank Sinatra on the Johnny Carson show when I was 6 years old. And I pointed to the television and I said, that's who I wanted to be when I grew up. That's when it all started. The voice lessons, the piano lessons, the rehearsals. My brother was my roadie. He carried the speakers to all these little gigs that my father and my piano teacher would do piano accompaniments to all these Anthony Newley, Sammy Davis, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett songs, and I would sing to piano tracks. So there was a very, very, if you think about it, I mean, it was a very, very premature stage of karaoke.
Were your first concert performances that you remember, were you playing, or were there live shows that you saw as a young boy that you still remember?
So, are you talking about me performing or my first concert?
I mean, sometimes.
So my first concert was Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin.
No kidding.
At the Westchester Premier Theater in Tarrytown, New York.
So that was the Rat Pack right there,
yeah.
man.
Yeah.
So what do you remember about that particular concert?
Okay, so
and how old were you?
I was 7. So
holy smokes! Well, I saw Ray Charles about that same age in Detroit at the Fisher Theater, and it blew my mind.
I'm sure it's kind of like you never realize. I mean, to me, at this stage, seeing Frank Sinatra when I was 7, almost 8 years old, was probably like me having front row tickets or backstage passes to see Genesis. As to what as you evolve as a musician. But Sinatra was always my hero, and still is. So one of the things that I remember in the concert per se is that Sinatra used to sing a song called "When I Was 17, It Was a Very Good Year," right? So there was a part of the song where Dean Martin was off stage and, Frank Sinatra sang, "When I was 21," and then all of a sudden you hear Dean, "You were a pain in the ass," and those were certain things.
Little shtick
stick going. And I mean, I remember the bar coming out, and at the time, disco was still prevalent, or just really evolving. So I think Sinatra took a version of Night and Day and made a disco version of Night and Day because you still want it to be hip. You know what I'm saying?
And he was the ultimate hipster.
And he was the ultimate hipster. I mean, people could turn around and say what they want. I mean, he wasn't the strongest technical-wise of vocalists, but his phrasing,
the breathing was
it was just amazing, and that gave him the phrasing that just he had the ability. What I found amazing and still do about artists like Frank Sinatra, he had the ability to take a venue like Madison Square Garden that holds 20,000 people and basically shrink it to the size of a living room. So you felt that whether you were third tier up or front row, that he was singing directly to you. And that's what I found amazing, more so than anything else. And I guess I was just, for me, I picked that up at a very young age. Because back then when you go see concerts, I'd see Paul Anka in concert and Tom Jones, and there was no big light shows. There was no spectacle.
Right. Which is what is common now.
Right. It was just the show. So you had to stand on your own merit. So that's what I find amazing, and that's kind of what I miss a lot of in today's artistry, is that there's not a lot of people trying hard enough to stand on their own merit. But yeah, Frank Sinatra was, and when I did performances, they were to piano tracks. My father, we had sound equipment. He would, as I constantly, I guess this is where I inherit my love of buying analog gear, is that my father would always go to Sam Ash and we would find the newest microphone or, he was a photographer. They were both photographers. He had his own photography studio. He did fine portraiture photography, wedding photography, schools, yearbooks. So in his own way, he was an artist. So I don't think at any one point anybody in my family said, no, you've got to put the music down. You need to become an architect. You need to become a lawyer. You need to, go get your MBA. Nobody in my family ever said that. Nobody.
It was an unspoken, perhaps, that it was okay, man, to explore your creative life and see where it goes.
Right. It was never, okay, you've done this long enough. Playtime is over. Now it's time to grow up and join the real world. It was never like that. I don't ever remember my father. I mean, I had summer jobs as a teenager. I mean, mowing lawns and whatever the case may be.
Those are character builders.
Those are, exactly. You develop a work ethic. But
exactly. Well, you sound like you already had the work ethic through your education.
I had no choice. Because growing up in an Italian household,
right.
And hearing how your father grew up through the Depression and lost his mother at 14 years old, and, I mean, you had no choice. It was, there was time for me to be my age when I was allowed to be my age.
Right. Yeah.
In terms
absolutely.
of, when it was time for me to go out and play at 9 years old or 10 years old. But it was also a difficult time for me because while my friends on the street were listening to Kiss and Aerosmith and REO Speedwagon, and that was the thing for them to listen to, you can only imagine what it's tough like to be 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and constantly be ridiculed because I wasn't into that. I was listening to Sinatra.
Wow.
I was listening to Tommy Dorsey. I was listening to Tony Bennett. I was listening to Bobby Darin.
And
I was
listening
listening
that
to
music.
And I loved Ella Fitzgerald and Duke Ellington. And but to try to share that with 9 or 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds that were into, like, did you get the new Kiss album?
And they wanted you to sing like that.
Right. And they didn't understand what I was about. So I think in a lot of aspects, it just alienated me. So I grew up kind of lonely.
Oh, wow.
In that regard.
Did
getting
you
picked on and...
Well, what I notice in a lot of artists, musicians especially, because practicing is a solitary process.
Right.
You're in the piano room, or you're sitting with your vocal coach and you're learning the exercises,
right,
so that you can do them on your own.
Correct.
And not screw your voice up.
Right.
So you're doing that for years to develop your instrument, which is you. It's not a piano player. It's not a guitarist. You are your instrument.
Correct.
And clearly you went through that whole early years, it sounds like, loving the Tommy Dorsey, loving the Frank Sinatra, listening to Duke Ellington, and all of that great music, all the women, great performers.
Sure.
And then your brother brings home Genesis.
Yeah,
how did that blow your mind? Was it the instrumental music? Because I'm sure once you heard Abacab and you say, "Well, I got to find this."
It was no reply at all, actually, because it was the use of the horns on No Reply at All,
and that's a very different type of horn arranging too.
Correct.
Compared to American music.
Correct. And hearing that. No reply at all, and then going back and listening to Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or listening to even Chicago, or listening to the Glenn Miller Band. It was a completely different mindset. And, Quincy Jones, I think, said it best, because at that time, there was becoming World War III in my household, because my brother was being looked upon as some sort of evil monster. And he wasn't trying to be anything like that at all.
He was just a guy from New York.
He was like, hey, this is a great album. I just saw this, this band in concert in Syracuse, and Phil Collins held the trumpet the whole time. He didn't play it, but he held it, it just, and my brother was a DJ on his college radio station. So he was always into...
Where did he go to college?
He went to Paul Smith's College, and
okay.
Which is about 48, 50 miles. It's a place in Saranac Lake, New York, which is just north of Lake Placid. So, which was really cool because he got to be at the 1980 Winter Olympic Games. So,
that's right.
So because he graduated high school 79 and then he went off to college, it was, he was always into broadcasting, wanted to be an engineer in terms of audio engineering. He had a natural knack for it. He really did. And it's a shame that he didn't pursue that. But he's a very, very successful hotel executive. He's been in the hotel industry for many, many years, and he does well.
So, but your brother was causing World War III.
Yeah.
Because of bringing in Genesis?
Because my parents are looking into him as if to say, "What are you doing? We have Paul under control. It's we have him under our mind.
We have him on the fast track to Carnegie Hall.
Exactly. And it's like all of a sudden out went serious music, and I put that in quotes, and in came, rock and progressive rock. And then I remember that the next album that he had gotten me, which is my favorite Genesis album to this day, it's actually in my CD player in my car, is Trick of the Tail. Of the Phil Collins era Genesis, I would have to say Trick of the Tail is my favorite Genesis album. I mean, I can go into my favorite Peter Gabriel era too, but that's how it all happened. And it just really Gone, people look, people think, okay, so Gone was Frank Sinatra. No, Gone wasn't Frank Sinatra.
It was just adding to the
I just jettisoned down a different avenue.
Yeah.
People think, okay, what's the bands that I've seen more in concert than anything else? Earth, Wind, and Fire, I've seen 16 times in concert. I've seen Genesis in concert 14 times.
Well, you did live in New York. They came there a lot.
Yeah, but I also did travel. So I also lived in Philadelphia. I also lived, in Florida. I also lived in California. I didn't really live in California. I was there for 3 months opening a hotel, and we'll talk about that a little down the trek. But, yeah, so, I did, Jersey and, I just, for me, it was, I wasn't blown away. I was just amazed. So how I learned to play drums was because of Genesis. We had a two-track Ampex reel-to-reel that my father had, which weighed a ton. It was just absolute. It almost felt like you needed two people to carry it. And it was shaped like a briefcase. And I was able to actually split the drums on one side through an accident of me just fiddling with wires.
Right, you were hacking it, and then you discovered that feature.
I just discovered the feature. So basically, what I did was I started playing drums to Abacab. And that's how I started teaching myself to have a better sense of time. Piano wasn't really giving me the sense of time, the sense of pocket, the sense of groove that it gives me now. Because it wasn't until later on in my teens that I realized how important working with a metronome or a click track is. And I don't want to use the word beat that into my students' mindset, but for lack of a better term, I try to stress the importance of, no matter how great of a musician you aspire to be, nobody wants to play with you if you can't play in time.
Right, you have to establish that internal clock.
Right, exactly. And so that's what drums gave me, not technique. I was by no stretch of the imagination going to start booking myself as a drummer when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, playing in wedding bands. No, the forte would have been vocals first and then keyboards, and then drums were always kind of tertiary because, my parents looked at playing drums were fun, not something that you needed to study. But voice and piano, you needed to study. And my father had hindsight, and this is going back 75, 76, 77, that if you're going to take voice lessons, you need to take an instrument as well because it's just going to help you sing better. And, one of my friends recently said that her formative years performing on woodwinds with posture and good embouchure and breathing and phrasing served her well when she became a professional singer. She already knew how to do certain parts of her instrument. Absolutely.
Even though you weren't blowing into a horn.
Right, exactly.
So do you think that there was something in your vocal training that was formative because it allowed you to have a sense of a musical phrase, as opposed to like me as a piano player, it was all about the vertical relationships and chords and knowing how to do that and coming, for me, it was like being able to, at a later age, realize that, I got to pay attention to singers all the time.
Right.
Because that gives me a sense of phrasing, and that's what people are listening for. People don't remember, cool altered chord there. They remember the beauty of a phrase and the vocal delivery.
Correct.
That's what's memorable.
But, it's also the altered chord under that melody or under that singing phrase that helps that vocal phrase. I think the two are very much hand in hand. So, for me, learning phrasing, I don't think it was intuitive. I just studied everything that Sinatra did. I studied everything that Ella Fitzgerald did. I studied everything that Tony Bennett did.
And you internalized that.
And I internalize it because you listen. Phil Ramone, the great producer, God rest his soul, Phil Ramone, was, said to Keyboard Magazine one time, the most important thing that an artist or an aspiring artist needs to do more than anything else is listen. And, I think that still holds very, very true. I mean, when I want to work on something, before I even try to really work on it, I just get it in. The emotion of the song, the passion of the song, the dynamics of a song, whether it's a piano piece by Beethoven or it's by Lionel Richie. I want to get the dynamics, the artistry of how the composition flows.
Right. That brings up another point, and we're kind of segueing, I guess, a little bit in my mind to some more of your educational experiences. Can you think of an aha moment in some of these lessons that you had in Carnegie Hall that you remember that really stick with you now? A certain lesson where you really understood something that sticks with you.
Yeah. As an opera student and somebody who teaches opera or classical music or bel canto method, as you pointed out, there's a term called, we have the term passaggio, which...
The passageway.
Or the passageway. So everything that I do is in Italian, so thank God for you to translate. But the passaggio for a male voice or even a female voice in a lot of aspects is located between D4 and G4 on an instrument. When you're writing in the treble clef, obviously the male voice is pitched an octave lower. But we use a term called cover, which is soft palatal influence to avoid blatancy. And that was my aha moment when I was able to actually shape the vowel and use less of the throat and not have an E vowel come out so blatant.
Wasn't harsh.
Yeah. So shrill, where it had more of a rounder tone to it. I tried to, when I vocalized, to even make sure that I kind of envision that I'm looking out at a sunset and there's just kind of in the Old West, and you could just see where the sun meets the ground, and you see that straight line. And so every time I'm vocalizing, I try to make sure that every vowel that I'm working with has that same vocal and vowel plateau. And that was the aha moment for me. So learning how to sing an oo vowel, and learning how to sing an ah vowel, that I still to this day go back and say, I could fix that. I could do that better.
Because you're conscious of those, the way in which you cover those vowel sounds, whether it's the hard or the soft vowel, because we sing them differently than the way we speak them.
Correct. I mean, everything with English is, with the teeth. Thank you. Whereas I teach more of a European diction because it's a softer diction to work with. And just not be so blatant. Learning how to blend the voice.
Tell me again, who was the teacher that was there at the aha moment?
Martin Leese.
Okay, Martin, right.
Martin Leese, yeah.
And was he a faculty member at Juilliard?
No, not at all. He was a private teacher. He was recommended to me from Edmund Karlsruhe, who was a bass baritone at the Metropolitan. And then, I met John Darrenkamp, who was a baritone with the Metropolitan. So it was great. I spent countless hours and days at Lincoln Center. It was great. Had season tickets to the opera. I saw Carlo Bergonzi's last performance. At that time he was close to 80, So, as I was always influenced by tenors when the voice changed. And then you go, and every once in a while, I had an opportunity to study with Franco Corelli. But the problem is you have these great tenors that can't translate what they do to a student in a lesson.
Right, because they might say, well, just do it.
Right, exactly. And I've experienced that with producers in the rock world as well, is that, you're a singer, just sing it. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you looking for? Because, as artists, we always want to second guess ourselves.
Right.
Because we are our worst critics. So I'm never really pleased with anything that I've ever done musically.
Well, as I've told my friends a lot, is that songs just escape.
Right.
Otherwise, you'll never get out of you'll run another take. So, we can. Well, I want to go into the world of your recording life, but one more question about the vocal studies that you did. Were there like a list of 5 or 6 different studies that you use all the time that were presented to you at that moment?
Yes.
And you just use them all the time? And do you find that there's an appropriate time in your students' learning arc, if you will, that you start putting that into their regular routine? And do you allow them to do it on their own, or are you there to listen so that they don't do it in an incorrect way, which develops bad habits?
That's a very, very good question, and it's kind of a 2-part answer. The exercises that I've learned from a child and the exercises that I've learned as an adult, I still readily do, and they're still very much archived and easily brought out when I'm working a specific technique, depending upon the genre of music that I'm doing. So yes, I haven't jettisoned down several different avenues to try to find different technique. I do try to reinvent the technique when it's applicable to something that's not classical music. In other words, I try to take a classical technique and try to figure out, how do I make this applicable in modern music, okay, where it doesn't come across like I'm trying to train everybody to be an opera singer. As far as the second part of the question is, how do I implement that, or how do I educate my students with that? I start them off on very, very simple exercises, the same ones that I do. And I think it's important, and this is where I'm going to go off for like 30 seconds. I think it's important that as a teacher, you want to be able to teach, but yet also as me being an artist, whether it be a live performance artist or a recording artist, I want to be able to show the students that I still do this, to be able to get ready for a performance, to get ready for a recording session. So I'm not just teaching you exercises. When I usually have my vocal students bring a digital voice recorder that I'm able to record their lessons, and I'm able to record their exercises. And I give them songs to sing on an internet website that they have a link to, where I can see them through their camera being able to show me how they're breathing, how they're phrasing, the whole 9 yards. So I'm never not accessible to them. Even though they may be studying with me for only an hour a week, I'm still accessible to them if they have a question. And the second part, I'm not a big fan of choirs. And let me explain to you why. And it's not that I don't love choral music and I don't love being part of an organization.
It's not a good environment to teach an individual singer.
Correct. Because if you're in the middle and Bob is to the left of you and Frank is to the right of you and you're taking private voice lessons, but Bob and Frank aren't, you're now picking up their bad habits. Because if they have an untrained voice, if they have an untrained breath technique, you're picking up the bad habits. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of choirs. I know a lot of parents come to me and they're like, well, my daughter's in this choir, my son's in that choir, and he's got jazz choir ensemble. And it's I try to explain to them the importance of individual study.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah, I know that a lot of my students in my school, it's all about starting to sing from the very beginning, right. Even though they're getting piano, or as you say, they're going to be in a choir in 6th grade. I know that if I can just remember what I learned about Van Cliburn, that he would sing his lines, then I need to be doing that, because that's about the best of an example of making people aware of the lyricism and the ability to know what a phrase is and how it starts and how it ends.
And I did the opposite. I didn't sing the line. I remember attending a class with Mel Torme, and when he learns a piece of music and he gets a lyric sheet, the first thing he thinks of is how can he say these words in conversation? Forget the melody, forget the music end of it. How can you say these words in conversation? Because that's where the story comes out. To me, that was what really helped my phrasing.
Because you would speak it, as you say, in spoken word.
Right.
And then if you can do that, then you can understand the rhythmic component of it.
Correct.
And just simply the way you speak it, then you modify it for the singing voice.
Correct.
Oh,
how to breathe,
really
where
cool.
to breathe. So I look at it, you could take any song lyric. I mean, for as silly as it may be, and turn it into, a conversation, and that's one of the things that I teach my students. I also teach my students to, when we're working on a karaoke track, I tell them, okay, I just want you to sing the vowel.
Oh, wow. So you'd isolate it.
So, yeah. So, instead of singing, you are the love of my life, I would actually go, ooh, ah, 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 and get them to, because it's the consonants that suck out all the air. They're the bastards in it, So, I mean, because vowels don't take any air to sing. So you could sing a whole song on a good tank full of air, and you could sing 24 measures, 48 measures.
Was that a Torme insight?
No, that was me. I kind of
designed something.
I did, once
epiphany,
again,
if
yeah,
you will.
it was an aha moment as an adult.
Wow.
So
that's a brilliant idea. I'm gonna steal that one, man. That's really good.
Go right ahead. Get your students to sing vowels. I mean, and I tell my students all the time, whether it's here in the studio or I'm at their homes, this is the form to make mistakes, because as teachers, as educators, that happen to be artists as well,
it's okay. Make mistakes,
right?
Man. Make them all.
We can't fix what we don't know is broken.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I think we as artists that happen to teach, as opposed to teachers that happen to be artists, and there's a big difference. It's our job to work a music lesson like we're doing a recording session as a producer. We want to bring the best out of our student. So I treat every vocal lesson like we're in a recording studio, and we're just prepping while the engineer is getting the 2-inch tape ready. You know what I'm saying? And we're just working outside in the little lobby area of the studio and just getting everything ready. So this way there's no stress. I want to eliminate stress across the board. Bad enough that the teacher has it. I don't want my student to have it.
Just like you, sun is shining, skies are blue. The nights you held me in your warm embrace, the smile you gave me from your golden face, the thoughts and dreams we had said and shared. Well, I never knew just how much I cared. The way you danced and held me tight, the way you kissed to say goodnight. 'Cause I know I've never met a woman just like you, and the magic in your heart has made me oh so true. And I know that I will always be in love with you. How proud I'd be with a woman like you. The times we sang and I'd play your favorite song, the moments we'd stay up, talk the whole night long. Now you're forever my best friend. Hope the love we share never ends. Darling, for you do I sing the song of love. I only hope and pray that love's just begun. My only dream's to hold you near, make you laugh so you may never shed a tear. 'Cause I know I've never met a woman just like you, and the magic in your heart has made me oh so true. And I know that I will just like you. The magic in your heart has made me oh so true. And I know I'll always be loving you. How proud I'd be. Imagine me with a woman like you. And I know I'll always be loving you. How proud I'd be with a woman like you. With a woman like you. With a woman like you. A woman like you.
Yeah, that's a fascinating approach to have it as a producer-artist relationship. And when did that really start to happen? Was it because you had created, and we can kind of talk about your recording life a little bit, the records that brought my attention to you and your work as a performing artist, your roster of players that are a part of your recording life is nothing short of astounding.
Thank you.
And so when that started to happen, when you were working with these incredible musicians that are a part of these world-class touring groups and recording sessions, did they have an impact in this way where you kind of thought differently about how you taught? Tell me a little bit about that journey. I know you're getting ready to have Rawfully Organic coming out. And tell me when that's coming out before we go down this road.
Well, if all goes well, I mean, obviously we've had some sidetracking issues. The gentleman that does all
life is what it is.
Well, the gentleman and my dear friend, who is a brilliant musician in and of himself, and just has amazing music that he writes and composes, Leon Alvarado, who has been my dear friend and graphic designer, he has just lost everything in Houston in the tragedy with Harvey.
So this is
this is just all of these
this is
things.
happening this week,
Yes.
and still ongoing, and we're
Correct.
all having friends that are going through
It's just absolutely
It's
one of my
awful.
engineers that was working in this studio moved back down to Houston, and he's going through it, and it's a terrible tragedy in my heart and prayers.
Things are clearly where music is now not even part of the conversation.
It is, but I mean, it's not on the frontal lobe of the brain. I mean, how I started working with all of these great musicians, I knew that they were heroes of mine, and I was blessed that all of them never turned me down when I approached them. And all of them, for as iconic performers and musicians that they are, none of them had iconic egos. So they were all very approachable, and they would all, we would sit at dinner after the session, and I would just hear stories, and it was just, tragedy, drama of like working with an artist that they worked with that didn't have their shit together, and the frustrations in the studio because, as you start to work with these people more and more, you realize that, I really got to bring my A game. I really have to bring my A game.
But they also make it possible for you to do that.
Absolutely.
Because they are such wonderful humans.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I mean, yes, I'm heroes of their work, but more importantly now at this stage, because when I see them at NAMM or the occasional email or phone call or Skype, I'm heroes of them more and more as human beings, and that's, to me, that's important, because I've worked with stellar musicians that were assholes.
Sure, we all have. And and they don't even realize they're doing it.
Oh, some of them, I think they do realize that they're doing it, but
I guess that's true. But the thing that I was considering last night, and when I was going to ask some questions about the recording life of yours,
go ahead,
is when you were thinking about creating that first album, and you're getting some of the musicians that were a part of those recordings, whether they were on the studio recording or they were bringing it live to the world. Tell me about what you were thinking about when you were contemplating doing your first record, and it wasn't going to be Italian opera. You weren't doing arias, but you were going to do a rock thing that pays tribute not only to the groups that you grew up with. Clearly, like you said, you love the Genesis album Foxtrot and Trick of the Tail. Sorry, Trick of the Tail.
I do love Foxtrot.
Foxtrot, that's awesome. Even a little bit earlier, but I'm a big Genesis nut too. But the thing about doing a track off of that album. And that's a great arrangement of Entangled, by the way. That's just stunning reimagining of that record. But anyway, I'm getting off the track here. Did you find it difficult to get all those people together, or like you say, it was just they believed in your project and they just said, "Well, tell me when I need to be there."
Okay, so I was a huge fan of Brad Cole, and people are like, "Brad Cole." Well, Brad was with. He's just been...
Well, Chaka Khan, Phil Collins, Paula Abdul, all these no-names.
Gino Vanelli. He basically wrote the introduction to Living Inside Myself, and he was on that whole Night Stalker album with Vinnie Colaiuta and Neil Steubenhouse, which also, subsequently, I've had the pleasure. I just did a session with Vinnie out in L.A. He's featured on Rawfully Organic, and Neil Steubenhouse was the bass player on my second album. So I had contacted Brad, and I really wanted to do an album as opposed to just a track or two. And I wanted him to produce it. And it was really hard finding him, even on the internet. It was just really difficult to locate Brad Cole. And I thought, wow, either this guy doesn't want to be found, or just nobody knows how to get in touch with him. So I eventually was able to get in touch with him. I found his website, and I got in touch with him, and I called him, and I waited for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, oh, this sucks. I was like, okay, well, that shot that idea. And then he called me 3 weeks later. I actually thought it was like a bill collector. And we wound up talking for about 3-4 hours on the phone, starting what was going to wind up being, this whole project that involved into not only an album but a DVD on the making of the album. And he had asked me, he goes, well, do you have a band? And I said, no, I don't really have a band. I can call upon musicians. He's like, well, the most important thing obviously is that we want to lay down rhythm tracks as,
Right, you wanted this live as possible.
So, which I'm a huge fan of now. It's
the only way to do it, man.
People study trumpet or cello for a reason, and to replace a trumpeter or a cellist with a sample, to me, is just an insult. Now, if there's budgetary issues, that's fine. I understand that. But, these people have a right to work. There's a reason why they studied. But anyway, Brad's like, oh, well, don't worry. If you need a drummer, we'll just get Chester to do it.
So Chester
and I'm like,
Thompson.
Chester as in Chester Thompson, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like trying to stick a fork in me to see, like, am I actually really hearing this?
Right.
Sure as shit, man. Chester was on.
And this was what year?
2009, 2008, 2009. I started the album. It took me 2 years to do.
Right.
Because we recorded it in Nashville, and also.
And Chester lives in Nashville. At least he teaches there.
And he lives in Nashville too. He lives about 8 minutes away from Brad's home studio, and so here I am. I'm on like the second or third session after we had gotten started, and in Walks Chester.
Asleep, they may show you aerial views of the ground. Freudian slumber, empty of sound. Over the rooftops and houses, lost as it tries to be seen. Fields of incentive covered with green. Mesmerized children are playing, meant to be seen but not heard. Stop me from dreaming, don't be absurd. What it seems, sometimes entangled in your own dreams, your dreams, your dreams. Time
playing with Genesis, on their last, their tour in 2007. So, and I've seen you many times with Phil. So it's kind of.
So you're quite the fanboy.
And here's the thing that went away after my second session with Brad, because Brad picked me up from the airport. Brad would take me to the hotel where I was staying. We would meet for breakfast at the Shoney's, which is no longer there because Nashville got devastated by
its own flooding.
Flooding, in 2010.
I remember that.
And we would meet for breakfast and we would talk, and it was great. I mean, when I first got picked up from the airport and he was there, he's wearing his Phil Collins sweatshirt. There's a little bit like I'm in the car with Brad Cole. I just saw you in 2005 at the American Airlines Center with Phil. It's kind of like...
Yeah, I was at that show too.
So, yeah.
Fantastic.
So it was a great show. That kind of went away rather quickly because I was the executive producer. So the bottom line is, at the end of the day, I'm paying for this.
Right.
So,
and you realize that you're bringing the same level of competency to the sessions as these guys.
I had no choice.
Well, man, don't sell yourself short.
No, but I really, because it was my first project where, singing into a microphone is like basically taking your clothes off, because that microphone is picking up absolutely everything. So you're not aware. And I've also become a big proponent of, there's no way around it here unless I put the monitors out of phase, but I hate wearing headphones when I'm tracking vocals.
Because you want to hear the reflections in the room, and
you get one sound through cans, and then you take them off, and you realize that you were tremendously out of tune, and then all of a sudden you sing it without the cans, and you're like spot on.
So you're monitoring. Maybe I've seen certain artists do this where they blow the monitors at them without cans,
right?
And so you'll get a little bit of bleed, but it seems like there's an energy that's there. Maybe with your vocal performance, because you're hearing it a little bit more naturally,
correct? As
opposed to like it's the ultimate near field monitors here.
Correct, being isolated. I've gotten better with it now. I take one ear off, but I'd much rather take an SM57 and run through a great preamp, and just have a reflector.
So
in front
Brad, did he?
No, I had to wear headphones.
Well, because
I was in a different room,
right? So Chester comes in. What was one of the other at the beginning of the recording of the album that walked in there and really just made you think, holy crap?
Daryl Sturmer.
Yeah, holy smokes, man.
Daryl Sturmer. And Daryl was sweet. Daryl's a sweet man. And his brother. I had two bassists on the album. One was Leland Sklar, and one was Daryl's brother, Dwayne Sturmer. And Dwayne was amazing, and we roomed together, and it was a lot of fun working with Dwayne. In fact, when I did live shows, Dwayne was the bassist. So, Daryl was one. Meeting Leland for the first time, you get over it very quickly, because you've got to be part of what you want and what you don't want. I would have to tell Leland, I didn't have to tell him. I said, don't be afraid to. And he's like, I know, play the bass, right? And he kind of knew what I wanted to say, because he knew it was a little awkward for me. But he gave me what I wanted, and everybody was amazing. Everybody, when the track or the take was over, it was always looking back and looking to see if I liked it or didn't like it. There were a couple of things that I would say, can we do this part again? Can I have these 8 bars redone again? And Chester, can you give me some some doubles on the hi-hat? That type of thing. So they were very, very accommodating. I never told anybody how to play, and I never told anybody what to play, which, according to Brad, was well within my realm of doing so.
Well, it's your role as a producer.
But I didn't have any worries about what they were bringing to the table.
And it sounds like to me that because you had those early years playing piano, playing drums, you were able to communicate ideas because at least you knew how to hold the sticks, and you could tell them, oh, I want you to play 16th notes here on the hi-hat.
Correct.
As opposed to playing something on the ride. And you actually knew what you were talking about.
Correct.
And so I think that as a producer, that's probably key, because a couple of the guys that I know that are part of that old school of producing where they could play anything, they could get out from behind the mixing console and step into the room and show the drummer what they wanted, and then the drummer would say, "Okay, I got it."
Right.
And so it sounds like you were able to communicate that really
it was
well.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that extreme with Chester. It was just and there were actually certain.
Well,
things.
you're not pushing Chester out of the chair.
Yeah. No. Sweetheart of a man that he is. He really is just a great guy.
Well, the thing is that, when you were doing the record Tell Me Something, and you had Brad at the helm, there was how many tracks on the record? I'm trying to remember. 10. There was 10 tracks. That's what I've been hearing. And what track stands out to you as your favorite? Do you have a favorite? This is like killing your children a little bit.
I know.
Because it wasn't.
Well, I only wrote 3 on there.
Right.
Only 3 of them are mine.
Well, yeah, and I clearly got that. But was there? Well, out of the 3 of the originals, which one did you think that they really nailed it? And you nailed it.
Okay, so I say this in the DVD documentary that Something to Tell, which goes with the album, that none of the songs that I had written originally that ended up on the album were arranged originally how I had written them. So we literally kind of took the arrangements of these songs and completely redid them. So like Woman Like You was a ballad. And now, I had 27 sax or 22 sax tracks on it with Gerald Albright and Alan Burton here from Dallas. And I had live steel drums on it to give it a very Jimmy Buffett type of feel. So that became my kind of calypso, and Brad played synth bass, keyboard bass, which he did an amazing job on the production and the arrangement of the song. So I think that tends to be one of my favorite tracks, and then also the title track, Tell Me Something, because that was a song originally entitled Heart and Soul that my best friend Chris Remediani from New York, who's a great songwriter, great singer, great guitarist, great musician, and once again, just a great person. He had written that song back in like 85, 86, and it was a dance track. And so we took it, Chris and I took it, and Brad came in and we turned it into, I kind of rewrote the song really and made it into this Steely Dan funk, and then I put a bridge in there. I wanted a bridge in there because I had Alan Burton from Dallas, who is just this amazing woodwind player. I loved working with Alan. Put his style of sax on there, and Luis Conte did a percussion solo. We did a little bit of a breakdown on it, so it was kind of cool. So we changed the title. I changed some of the lyrics, wrote the bridge. So I was a very proud moment
where you
that.
transformed these songs from what your original vision was, and you were open enough and not constricted enough that you say, oh, this is the opportunity of a lifetime to fully flesh this out.
Correct.
In an unknown direction, but it made the song really come alive.
Absolutely. And you deal with this, I deal with this, I deal with artists all the time that are like, no, it has to be this way. And I'm like, yeah, but it would be really better if you went down this road.
Or at least try it, man.
Right, exactly.
Because it's up to you to decide ultimately.
Correct.
But you shouldn't limit yourself to only that original vision for anything, whether it's a DVD. Now, if I remember right, it was Eric Klein that did the documentary?
Yes, Eric Klein, who's one of my dearest friends as well. We just spoke not too long ago. He
Wonderful.
did the documentary, Something to Tell, and I originally released Tell Me Something as a 2-disc set, one with the CD and one with the DVD, Something to Tell. And then I have a few boxes left of that, just the actual DVD, which I apologize for not bringing. I should have actually.
Oh, it's all right, man. I know where you live.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, the thing that that was fascinating as I was exploring a little bit more about your recording life is that you did this autism project, and I promised one of my best friends in the world that I would ask about this because she has a young son that's on the spectrum.
Okay.
And why did you do that project? Is there a personal story here?
Yes. I am not a music therapist. I don't claim to be one, and I certainly don't play one on television.
I think we're all music therapists in one degree or another.
Right.
But there's some people that have degrees.
Correct, right. So that's what I meant by that.
Work at the Cleveland Clinic and places like that.
Right, exactly. And it's kind of an oxymoron to have somebody like myself, an Italian New Yorker, to have patience. And I normally don't. Because, you have your different time zones and then you have my time zone and, But I was called to work with somebody whose child had autism. And I had never really worked with anybody with autism or any type of really severe special needs at all. And it just got to the point where when I started working with this child, it was just an amazing
How old
feeling.
was this student?
At the time, I want to say 6 or 7.
Oh, wow. Very young then.
Very young. Zach Laviola is the child's name. They've recently moved from Dallas to Austin. But an amazing family, and I was working with Zach's older brother, Jake, and Zach's eldest sister, Rachel. They were both my voice and piano students. So I kind of inherited Zach as to see he always had a love for music. Well, what I found out over the years of working with either children or adults on the spectrum is that they have tremendous amount of talent. Not only that, they have perfect pitch. I mean, Mike, when I tell you perfect pitch, I could put a child in a room that knows his notes, okay, facing away from the piano, and I can play an E flat major 7 chord on the first or second octave of the piano and an F minor 9, 3 octaves up, and when I play them all together at once, from the bottom to the top, he can tell me what note I'm playing. I mean, just
that's
mind equals blown.
It's because different parts of their brain are processing it differently
Correct.
than what we do.
I've never met a student that I've had the privilege, and it is a privilege because I always feel that I will learn more from my students with autism than they will ever learn from me. It's really a joy. It's really a delight. And I don't really know how this kind of transpired, but one of my good friends who became even like a brother to me is Lee Carreri. And if you've ever seen the original movie Fame or the television series, Lee Carreri played Bruno Martelli on the original movie Fame and on the television series. Well,
And he plays everything. I mean, piano,
horns,
flugelhorn, trombone. So he's everything more than what you saw in the film.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And he grew up in Yonkers, New York. I grew up in Harrison, Mamaroneck, New York. He's 88.
So you had the how you doing?
Yeah, exactly. There was that camaraderie. He has a dog, Herbie, that he loves, and I had made a comment, and that's kind of how this all started. It was social media can be a great thing, to bring people closer together, especially when the common denominator is something as beautiful and as loving as music.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
So that's how I got started. I contacted Lee, and he had these 4 songs from Fame, and of course I remembered them from the TV series. And I thought, I was listening to a song that he had done called "Could We Be Magic Like You," that he had written for an episode of Fame, and I thought this would be a great autism anthem. And he went back, and I called him, and we talk a lot. I probably talked to Lee more than I talked to anybody. And he listened to it, and he's like, okay, yeah. He goes, what do you want to do? So, I mean, I picked his 4 songs that he had done for the show, and I said, I want to rearrange them and do them. And so we took a 3/4 song, and we made it into 6/8, and kind of I wanted that what the world needs now is love, sweet love type of vibe. And if you ever listen to the version of it, it kind of has that feel. And it was also the first time I'd actually ever played on one of my projects. I did the drums, which I didn't anticipate doing because I was going to hire somebody. And Lee's like, I've seen you screw around in the studio. Why don't you just do it? So I did the drums, and Neil Steubenhouse did the bass. Chris Remediani, I flew him in from New York. He did the guitars. Lee did the horns as well as the keyboards. in the piano, and Nichelle Monroe and Blanca Gomez. Blanca was one of my former vocal students in Las Colinas, and she moved out to L.A. to pursue a career in acting, and she's a brilliant actress and brilliant singer. So I had her come in and kind of ghost the voice on Could We Be Magic, and then I've developed an amazing friendship with Nichelle Monroe, who is just this amazing vocalist. Came in and do background vocals, and Alicia DeMeza did harp. So once again, it's like I don't use samples. And Alicia was so touched by the project, she packed her harp up in the car and drove from Arizona to L.A., to play on one song. So, it just, and so I just made it to the point where I wanted to do this for an organization in Los Angeles called autismunites.org. So anybody that purchases any of my downloads on any of my albums, whether it be Tell Me Something or what we call Songs for Social Awareness, I donate 25% to autismunites.org because it's so much fun working with these children and the adults that are on the spectrum. It's terrible that they're on the spectrum, but it's just a life-changing, it's an amazing experience. To me, they're my gold and platinum records. Working with them, that's my Grammy Award. I may never get an accolade or an award for anything I've ever done musically, but you know what? I don't need it. I have them.
Someone lies bleeding in a field somewhere. So it would seem we've still got a long, long way to go. I've seen all I want to see
I guess, as we kind of wrap up today, we're here recording at your studio, Cozy Ark. And I know you have a love for animals. We were talking about that at the beginning of the podcast, that you have an extraordinary zoo at your home. And so who's residing at Paul's zoo these days?
2 ducks, Cuff and Link. I had 2 lambs and 2 German Shepherds, one of which, both of 2 Lambo passed away in June, and Adrian passed away. My German Shepherd, Adrian.
I'm sorry, man.
Thank you. Passed away May 6th.
It's been a tough year.
It has been a very difficult year. I mean, I'm closer to my animals than I am to probably some of my family members.
As one does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're with you for so many years and they become a part of your home. And but there is a new lamb and there is a new German Shepherd that is not mine, but I claim him. I have visitation rights. He lives in the house with me with my roommate, who happens to be one of my vocal students, and I'm actually producing his band, December Screams Embers, a metal project, which is so out of my realm, because it's not a traditional singing metal project. It's more of a screaming metal project. So it's kind of like I'm sitting in here for a session and they're tracking vocals, and the vocalist, who happens to also be one of my vocal students, he's like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Well, if you're angry, you're definitely getting that point across." So
exactly.
No, but they're young. They're all 21, 22, 23 years old, and they're all learning and
getting it started. So when you bring a group into, especially when you're just producing or at least tracking, and you're serving that role for them, and they come to the Cozy Ark, are you finding that this might be some of the people that come in, it's the first time they've been in a world-class studio with all the gear and the monitors and the great drum set, and you're educating them just how to comport themselves within the studio?
I think so. I think a lot of them come into a studio and, there's the wow factor. I'm going to be in a recording studio and I'm doing this. And then there's other artists that come in and they kind of know what they want and they know how to, it's not their first rodeo.
Right.
So I have to, when I play the producer hat, I have to kind of go with the artist, as the great producer Arif Martin, God rest his soul, would say. That you try to find the best preamp and mic to go with a specific vocalist, and it's they come in and for the first day or so, they're very nervous. Especially when they put the cans on and there's a click track. And if they've never rehearsed it with a click track, there's a lot of timing issues. And I'm not one to do Melodyne or, anything like that. I mean, we do if it's absolutely necessary, but I'd rather get it done right because I want the performance. So I don't necessarily track, as a producer, I don't track from start to finish one song. A lot of times we'll do that and we catch magic in a bottle because we're just checking levels and we have maybe 8, 12, 16 bars of that scratch track, so to speak, that will definitively end up on the project. But mostly it's kind of like they come in, it's like they want to take pictures and they're like, what does this do? And what's this? And so it's an education, which I think is important to an aspiring artist, that you need to know what a compressor is. You need to know what an EQ is. You need to know what a tube preamp is as opposed to a solid state, and what you're looking at and what you're looking for. A lot of people, I worked with an artist who, she was absolutely brilliant. She came in for a few days. She had already known what she wanted, and she picked this studio because it was a recommendation, because she wanted that Tapestry, Carole King sound. And, I'm a analog player stuck in a digital world. So for me, I created the Cozy Ark because I wanted to make records the way records were meant to be made, recorded through analog. Yes, I use Pro Tools as a digital platform as my DAW, but everything that's here doesn't go through plugins. It goes through analog gear. And the other reason why I created the Ark was because I wanted people to come in here and be able to feel that, for all of this gear, including an engineer, and to be able to use, the Taylor guitars or the Gretsch or the Rickenbacker or the drums, or, you're singing into, a vintage U87 or a Manley Gold reference mic. I wanted them to feel that, what, they can do this and not have to cost, donate a lung or a kidney. And also I created my own wrecking crew. There's a great documentary out there called The Wrecking Crew.
Right. Very famous.
And that's what I did was I created half a dozen session players from bass, guitar, drums, vocalists, and they come in, keyboard players, if I'm not playing on it, to come in and because we work together so well and so often, we kind of know our ins and outs and idiosyncrasies as players and as artists. So I wanted the artists to come in that didn't have a band to know that they could come in relatively inexpensively and come in and get their album up on iTunes. I just wanted to become an enabler of dreams, really. The studio has been a dream of mine to be able to turn around and just take aspiring artists and say, when people come in and say, God, you should be getting $80, $90 an hour for this place with your gear. And I'm doing it for $50, and that's inclusive of an engineer. And my session players don't get paid per the hour. They come in and they get paid $80 a song, and they're very happy with that. And they're very brilliant players.
And it's 1, 2, and it's done.
Right. I usually get 3 passes on a drum take. Same thing with a bass, same thing with a guitar. And the reason why I have 12-string or Gretsch or hollow body or Strat or whatever is because sometimes something I hear doesn't fit a Telecaster. It doesn't, I want an acoustic track and I want to pull out the 6-string or the 12-string or have it doubled in a 12-string.
Well, it's good that you have those options.
Yes.
'Cause I've been in some studios where they have racks of gear and they've got the Neve console, but there's not a guitar in sight. There's not a selection of amps. And when I did my last record, I had the luxury of playing a dozen different kinds of guitars if I wanted to.
Right.
Or if I wanted a particular tone, I could go for a particular sound because that amp was right there. I could play the Fender. I could play the Vox. I could pull that off. And that's unusual that I've found in most studios because everything is about the digital world, as you will.
Correct.
And we all know it's all about how you perform your instrument. It's not the gear that it runs through.
That's first and
in
foremost.
the digital domain. So that's fantastic that you've had that vision from the beginning.
And my engineer and I will talk about it, and it's about ears, not gear. It's about what we're hearing and what's the best approach to song structure and what's the best melody line. You want your vocalists, when they're sitting in the ISO booth with the cans on and they're singing into this microphone, you want them to sing their money shots, their money notes. That's, it's going to be, I hate working with somebody who comes in and says a song has to be in this key. Well, that's not really your range.
Right. You need to bring it down a couple of steps.
Right, exactly. And
they find their sweet spot key when you allow them to do that.
Correct. And it's a very sensitive environment. We're very fun here. There's a lot of laughing, a lot of jokes. We don't take ourselves seriously at all. We definitely take
But there's the music
production.
that you're trying to make, though. And
Absolutely.
that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
You have to be laser beam focused, and if something needs to change, it's all about the song.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that makes the Cozy Ark or my teaching school special is that I'm not
and
just
tell me
teaching...
the name of your school again?
The DidamoSchool.com. And one of the, we all work in the DFW Metroplex to provide a fun, informative, educative, if that's a word.
It's a word because we say it is, but you bring your students here in the studio.
I do some of them, yes.
Yeah,
when they travel.
When they're ready to
Right.
be a part of that.
My students also earn free studio time. So, the more you study, the more you put into your the education aspect of it, the learning aspect, the technique, the pedagogy. You can earn studio time. So when you're writing a song, here's your place to be able to do it.
Fantastic, man.
So, music's got to be fun. Mike, you and I have been doing this for so many years that if we can't demonstrate to the people that we're educating, that we're teaching,
that we're excited every time we do it,
how can we expect them to be excited?
It's force a personal example, man.
And there's just, the Ark is a boutique studio. You sit in it. The lighting is conducive to your living room. It's very no pressure. And we're just really blessed. I think as musicians, and when I say we, I say the DFW community, because we're bringing a lot of joy to a lot of people, from performance, from recording, from education. It's all ties into one another. So,
well, I can't think of a better way to end this podcast, but with what you just said. But there's something that you said in your documentary, Something to Tell, that I wanted to reference. You said, in reference to making the record that's a part of that, you said, I'm living my dream. I did it. I started it. I completed it. Paul D'Adamo. What I really found interesting during our conversation is how much he loves teaching, and that he uses a recording studio to enhance his music school. You can find more information about his music academy at the D'Adamo School of Performing Arts. The website is thedadamoschool.com. And don't forget to check out his studio website, CozyArk.com. The tracks you heard during today's interview are from Paul's albums and can easily be found via iTunes, CD Baby, Amazon, and at mrrmusic.com. My name is Mike Dawson, and I am the Silent Pianist. You can find everything you want to know about me at my band's website, roarelectra.com, or at my Twitter, at Mike Dawson Music. And you can find the Silent Pianist podcast anywhere podcasts are found. Goodbye, old friends. I am the Silent Pianist. See you next time.